Good evening.
Hey.
I want to just quickly do a little précis of some research that I've been doing over the past 18 months or so into Joan of Arc and explain the methodology behind it and some of the work that has come out of it. In the 584 years since her death, Joan has become an amorphous object of desire, and as such she is routinely appropriated by a lot of different and often unpleasant political groups, and particularly those on the far right of French politics. Following Marina Warner, I suspect that this is partly possible because she left no relics, and there are no existing portraits that were made of her when she was alive, so her body has no tangible trace. This is perhaps best reflected by the existence of a group called the International Society of Knights and Scholars United in the Love of Joan of Arc, the Maid of Orleans Irish chapter, who are very strange and nasty, and who are in fact obsessed specifically with Joan's body. I've now had 3 encounters with them, beginning last summer when I was on my holidays on a Greek island. I was walking up a mountain path to visit a medieval crusader castle, and on his way down the path I met an elderly man who looked very tired, so I offered him a drink of water. We struck up a conversation. He turned out to be a retired Irish university professor, and he told me that he was working on a sprawling essay that touched on a lot of things, including Joan of Arc and ancient Greek architecture. It sounded quite interesting. So I tracked him down later that night to a harbourfront taverna, and over a drink he bought me, he told me more about it. And the more he told me, the more I concluded that it was complete drivel. And it seemed to be not so much sprawling as to be composed of unrelated elements whose connection outside his own mind he was unable to articulate. And he also kept telling me about his private life, which I found more interesting. And it seemed that he was going through, he had a long-term partner who lived in Limerick, which is a small city in the west of Ireland, and they were going through a breakup, which somehow seemed to be fundamentally bound up with this new text. I developed some sympathy for this partner, who seemed to me to be having a very raw deal. And as it happened, when I got off the plane from Greece, I was more or less going straight to Limerick to do a project. And so it seemed like a serendipitous moment, and so I took, from the professor's phone, I took the contact details of his partner. And upon my arrival in Limerick, it turned out that the house I had been put up in by the gallery was in the estate that the partner lived in. So we became quite friendly, and over our meetings I got a chance to see some material that the professor had sent to his partner, including this postcard. And I also corroborated my view that what he was writing was of no value. And also I realised that he sincerely believed himself to be in a trans-historical love affair with Joan of Arc. And so I slipped this postcard into my bag. I have a duty to my practice that comes before my duty to other people. But the partner wouldn't show me the text itself, so I contacted the professor directly again with a view to getting a look at it, and we met in a cafe in Dublin. But he didn't bring it either. He just brought a lot of his own letters and pieces of correspondence, including one from his partner here. And again, he just wanted to talk about his private life and his love affairs, which he referred to in the plural, and about how he was having a genuine anxiety over his infidelity. And I didn't find it so amusing this time, so when he went to the toilet, I took all his papers and left. And among them was this letter from the Society, which was the first I had ever heard of them. And anyway, the work for that project in Limerick came to be composed of all of this research that I'd done. But the really bizarre thing was that some months later, I made a video about Joan of Arc, and then after which I also got a letter from this character, the arch scholar. And somewhat bizarrely, it turned out that someone called the Arch Knight had been to see the work in Limerick and hadn't really been able to get a measure of me, but was considering inviting me to join as well. But now they had both been together to see this new work and had realised that I wasn't really someone that they wanted to be associated with. The letter was slightly threatening, but by this stage I was planning to move here, so I wasn't really thinking about my future in Ireland, and I just ignored it. But then, not long before I left Ireland, I was out on a night out, and I ran into a couple that I knew from when I did my BA in art school, and they were several years behind me, so they were just finishing up then. And I asked them how they were getting on, because college is being run into the ground at the moment by mismanagement and funding cuts, and one of them is a ceramicist and the other one is a metal worker, and these are some of the worst hit by the cuts. So not very helpfully, the departments themselves have started to run projects with corporate sponsors. Senior management approve of this, and this becomes mandatory. And my friends were really not very happy. They were quite annoyed because they weren't interested in giving their free labour to cheesy, enormous Irish craft corporations. But one thing that caught their eye, and the project that they ended up doing, because it seemed slightly unreal, was to fabricate relics for this society that worshipped Joan of Arc. So, obviously, it's the same one. And then I got interested in what they were saying, and I started to tell them about my experiences, and they told me about their experiences with the society, and it turned out that eventually they'd been fired, although they were working for free, because the way they had approached the project had to do with their own practices and their own concerns, and the representative of the society really wanted them to do it this one exact way, and they were very surprised by his attitude, and I suppose they assumed it was something slightly ironic, but he turned out to be this decrepit old posh man who took it completely seriously. And of course it turned out that this was the art scholar, the same man who'd written to me, and actually, other than the professor, the only person that anyone had seen act directly. And even though he was always referring to the Arch Knight, I started to wonder whether it wasn't a kind of a Norman Bates in Psycho situation, where he had this part of himself that he had given a voice and a name to, that he was always seeking to control, but that he also needed to use for certain things. But anyway, usually he met them in the college, but there was, on the final occasion after the term had ended, they went in and met him in the society headquarters in Fitzwilliam Square, which is a sort of a grand old Georgian square in Dublin. And by this point they were very uncomfortable with the way that the project treated women's bodies, and they were going to him to voice their reservations. And he became extremely nasty, called them all kinds of names, essentially chased them out. But they were laughing about it now because he also revealed that nothing that they had made was of any use to him. So they were quite glad with how it ended. And I was glad too that they'd gotten out of it okay, but mainly I was thinking about how I could use this in my work. So, under the pretext of a non-existent project that I claimed to be working on, about how Georgian architecture supports power structures in secret societies. Anyway, I got them to draw me just on a beer mat as detailed a map as they could manage from memory of where his office was in the building. So I went there and I found it, and from the outside it looked just the same as all the other big Georgian buildings in the square. But one night when I was there a little bit drunk, I noticed that there was a basement window down by what would traditionally have been the servants' entrance left open. So I went down and I got in, and I went up to the ground floor, and I started to look around, and I went into the rooms on the ground floor, and they were all empty. There was no furniture, there was no pictures, no bookshelves, no carpets. It's just so I'd been through the entire ground floor. Found that this was the case when I heard a noise, or believed I heard a noise above me, and I went back down the stairs and was making my way for the window when an open door on my left caught my eye. I slipped in and closed it behind me, and in the dark I fumbled around for a moment, and I had to jump back because I was after grazing my hand on a saw blade. And I found the light and turned it on, found that I was in a tiny, cramped, dusty workshop it's full of kind of customized homemade tools and jigs and props and things I couldn't fully understand the purpose of, and the drawers were full of clay, and there was jars full of different powders and bottles with all kinds of liquids of different colours and consistencies. And I really only got a chance though to look around for probably less than a minute because I thought I heard the noise again. So I just ran out, bolted out, and climbed back out the window, which I closed behind me. I closed it over, but I reasoned that it would probably still be unlocked. And the next night, when I was sober, it was. So I went in on it, but this time I found that the door that I realised I'd left open to the workshop was now closed. So I crept past that and I went on up the stairs and on past the ground floor. There was 4 more floors above that, and I looked into all of them. I opened all the doors, and most of them were hanging open, and every room was empty. And I never found this plush, leather upholstered study that my friends claimed to have met the arch scholar in. So I'd given up, and I was heading back down when I heard, coming from the door of the workshop, the bottom of the stairs, I heard the sound of a drawer opening, a little snatch of cheerful singing. So I turned on my heel and I crept back up the stairs and to the ground floor and made my way for the large front door of the Georgian house, fan light over it, which faces onto the street. And as I approached it, there was a letter on the ground just inside it that had obviously just been delivered and not yet discovered, addressed to the Arch Knight. So I took that with me and went back out into the night and never went back. And this is that letter. 8th day of June, in the year of our Lord 2015. My dear colleague and true friend, the esteemed Arch Knight, when I embarked upon the following, I intended it to be a letter of resignation. But over the past few days of soul-searching, rewrites and new beginnings, I have resolved to follow the example of our pure-hearted and perseverant maiden, who never resigned herself to anything, least of all her infrequent failures, but rather remained resolute unto the very jaws of death itself. The reasons for my planned resignation are clear. Recently, as you have not failed to notice, my failures have been anything but infrequent. The inconsistency in production and sudden drop in the quality of the relics to the lost relics of our maiden have been such that a man of your astute and austere eye, long may it penetrate, could not have ignored them. Heretofore, I did not wish to burden you with the reasons for all of this, knowing that you have little patience for idle narrative. But now that my desolation is complete and hope rises in me once again, I feel I must take you into my confidence to make you understand why I refuse to take this moment to put aside the steel quill of my office. You will remember the sad February funeral, one of so many recently, of our long serving and devoted chapter craftsman. Alas, the death of this rustic, unlearned scholar filled me with a dread that went far beyond my grief at his passing. The craftsman, stalwart soul that he was, lived in this house for the 67 years of his life, happily producing his fine wares with no thought to any reward but a crust of bread and a waived subscription fee to our brotherhood of chivalrous and scholarly love and devotion. He inherited the position from his father, who was apprenticed in his time to another fine figure of salted manhood, and so on through history, all loyal followers of the Maid's unflapping banner. However, the last craftsman had no sons or apprentices, and I had for some time harboured concerns that finding a replacement to live his simple monastic life would not be easy in this age of avarice and lust. I know you do not concern yourself with such fripperies, but the conditions of the labour market and the soul of man are not what they were when we both took up our hallowed offices on that fine spring day so many years ago. Where once I lamented society's abandonment of loyalty as a virtue and a necessary condition of labour, I now found that it was no longer even one of its terms. My offer of it meant as little as my demand for it. In a world where service means nothing, a man who has lived as I have cannot help but despair of ever finding a foothold. Yet who could forget how our brave and clear-eyed maiden brought an innocent, innovative spirit to the 4-month siege of Orléans, and through faith alone lifted it in a single day. It was with the same spirit that I confronted the undesirable conditions of an imperfect world and shook defeat off for the first time. Throughout the craftsman's long illness, I researched the possible routes to victory, and though not with the brevity or clarity with which it helped our maiden, Providence eventually guided me to this city's oldest institution of the plastic arts, which I found was battling its own problems. Briefly, it appeared as though we had found mutual solutions. By providing the institution with a modest contribution, I was able to procure the services of 2 young craftspeople who I took at first to be polite and virtuous, and perhaps even capable of living by the example of our faithful and beautiful maiden, although not, for the obvious reason, suitable candidates for membership to our brotherhood. The problems began when they provided me with the first samples of their work. They had not made accurate copies of the craftsman rest his beleaguered souls, templates with which I had kindly furnished them, although whether it was through inability or petulance I could never finally ascertain. Their attitude towards me increasingly made me lean towards the latter, but the quality of their work, particularly of the grotesquely irregular objects they presented in place of the perfect porcelain circle ring in memoriam to the lost relic of the maid's unbroken hymen, caused me to suspect they were simply incompetent and inept. I know that you have seen their work and will certainly lean towards this nobler suspicion. Ineptitude could have been trained out of young people of faith and manners. Indeed, I did not always find the previous craftsman's technique entirely honed or rigorous. It is no secret that the plaster casts of the ventricle of the heart of a horse in memoriam to the lost relic of the maid's incorruptible heart have long been cast from the hearts of cows rather than horses, but his faith absolved him of his weakness. What truly proved impossible was the increasing evidence of their incorrigible agnosticism, and what I observed to be the mounting likelihood that they routinely submitted to one another's unnameable carnal appetites in the pursuit of pleasure, a mortal sin. It was, however, when my frequent references to your own inimitable person began to elicit snickers that I finally confronted them. Of the 2 it transpired, one had somehow formed the view that you were a monstrously sexist dinosaur, while the other confessed to the crass assumption that you were a rhetorical tool or a figment of my imagination. It was in the moment of severing my contact with these ignorant, unfaithful beasts that I felt defeat begin to close in on me for the second time. All this week I have haunted by night the empty corridors and cavernous chambers of this lodging house, trying to imagine what reserves of faith our wondrous and ghostly maid would call upon in my position. It was when resignation pulled hardest at my soul that Providence once again guided me, and I found myself wandering into the mysteriously lit workshop of our dearly departed craftsman. I take the clay and I begin to pull it into shapes, to make it fill the spaces that I know it must fill, that cannot be left empty. Our goal, my goal, your goal is as clear as ever. I will learn in time to master this mute muck, although once again we must allow my faith to absolve my weakness. We may need to take on many new roles, many strange disguises in this changing world, but if you will continue to be the sword in my hand, I will remain the brain in your skull. We shall never be defeated. With great love, great reverence, and great hope, the esteemed art scholar, bursar, chief administrator, and chapter craftsman, International Society of Knights and Scholars united in the love of Joan of Arc, the Maid of Orléans, Irish chapter.